Hi, I'm Melissa Jacobs. I'm the managing editor of TheFootballGirlcom, and you're listening to the Cleats Off podcast with Liz Bhandari.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Cleats Off podcast. I'm your host Liz Bhandari and this is a show that brings you closer to the game you love. Today's guest is Melissa Jacobs, founder and managing editor of TheFootballGirlcom. Melissa and I talk about her career and how it all started to where it is today, her advice to those thinking about career in media, details on the incredible guests that she's had on her podcast, and finally, I get Melissa's thoughts on the NFL draft and whether the season kicks off this September. Enjoy the show! Welcome to the show, Melissa. How are you and how are you coping with lockdown?
Yeah, I mean, I'm as good as can be expected, I guess. My family's healthy, and where I live, the park's just reopened. So trying to get outside and, kick some balls around, and yeah, just waiting. Obsessed with the news, I think, like most people.
Yeah, it's hard not to be. It's kind of like the one thing that keeps you kind of, I guess hopeful in some kind of way.
Right. Or not hopeful, depending on the day.
There's that too. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining today. I've been a fan of yours and TheFootballGirl.com for a long time. And I remember kind of when I discovered your site, and it was refreshing for me to see that it wasn't this whole, okay, ladies, here's Football 101, so you can watch a game with your husband, or here's a recipe so you can cook for your husband and his friends while he watches the game. So, I just instantly could relate with your site, and it was, I was grateful that it existed. Where did the idea for it come around for you?
Well, I appreciate you noticing that it wasn't, pink and just all that kind of recipe-ish stuff. Not that recipes are bad, but so I'm trying to give you a not too long-winded version. So I had been at ESPN. I was a TV producer, a radio producer there, turned TV producer, and had worked really heavily on NFL Live and SportsCenter. Very entrenched in the NFL side of things. And I just had always loved the NFL. And I thought that I knew it. Hopefully I still do. And I didn't really find any outlets at the time that it wasn't even just that we have WAG galleries on the side and lovely ladies of the day, things that clearly are not going to appeal to me specifically. It made me feel like there's a club and I was a part of it. But it was also just even in the vernacular of the writing. And then all the dudes got together for the fantasy draft and, so that just kind of stuck with me. And then, I was pretty entrepreneurial. I continued to work for ESPN. I worked on the ESPYs and some shows that they did that were, they let me work remotely. But I just sort of wanted to do my own thing. And I thought there was a market to cater to female fans in a more sophisticated way that had ever been done. One of my fellow producers at ESPN, she actually wanted to start a book, all fantasy football related too. And I don't know, I just decided to turn that into a website. And I was still kind of concurrently working at ESPN when it started. And it was just sort of, okay, I'll just do this sort of as a side project and kind of see what happens. And then a lot of cool things started happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's amazing to see where it is today. And, it's become a brand on its own. Did you ever think that it would take off like this?
I mean, yes and no. And I mean, quite frankly, I have some regrets about it because, the whole time it's been around, which has been basically a decade now. I've pretty much concurrently been doing something else, be it, working for ESPNW, being the NFL editor at Sports Illustrated, opportunities that presented themselves because of it, which is great. But it's always in the back of my mind been man, if I just 100% of the time, because I hate not working on something 100% of the time. However, it has some very cool things have happened. probably the most notable, and I forget this except once a year when it comes up in like your Facebook memories or whatever, that we were actually the question on Jeopardy one. So that was like 5 years ago. And I'm like, okay, I can be proud of the work that's been done. Like this legitimizes it.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so I'm happy with what we have, and I'm so proud. I mean, you're included in this. Just what has been spawned in the last 5-6 years. The number of women that host podcasts like yourself, or obviously that are reporters and are talking more on the X's and O's side of things, and not that are just accessories that have really had the female side of this like really booming. It's really exciting.
Yeah, it's really exciting, and I'm always inspired by women who've, paved their way to like an incredible career doing something they love. And, you are one of these women. From being the youngest exec producer at KNBR Radio in San Francisco, you're a 2-time Emmy Award winning producer at ESPN, you've contributed to the likes of ESPN, W, Guardian, and so on. Like, talk me through your journey. How did this all start?
Well, it's funny. When I was in college, I was a political science major, not a journalism major like so many people in this industry. Didn't go to journalism school. I wanted to be a sports agent, and I basically wanted to be what like Nicole Lynn is today, like that. Yeah. I wanted to be at the time. It was going to be like the first woman who represents mainstream male athletes. Like I wanted to have female athletes as well, but I wanted, and I was so confident in my potential abilities as, a litigator, as a legal mind. I had registered for the LSAT. I was surely going to law school. Then I was like, oh, I don't know anyone in sports. And I was in the Bay Area, and I was like, I guess I'll get an internship in sports. And for some reason, I just fell on the media side of things. I interned at a radio station called KNBR, which is one of the biggest stations actually in the U.S. It's in San Francisco, and I loved it growing up. And then, I don't know, it just kind of quickly, I got opportunities very, very fast to produce shows, and I loved producing, to cover the 49ers, cover the Giants. I mean, traveling with them, like these really amazing opportunities of the teams that I grew up loving at a really young age. So I was kind of like, all right, well, law school, I can wait. I'm going to kind of play for a while, because it didn't really feel like work, even though, even my bosses at that time were like, okay, you need to chill out on the weekend. Like, literally are working 24/7. It just felt that was, the whole helpful and a hindrance probably, but and so then I was, at that station, KNBR, I became the executive producer, and then ESPN offered me a job. I had never driven in the snow before, and I moved to Bristol, Connecticut, where it was in the midst of a snowstorm in January of that year. And and then I don't know, I found the TV side of things very attractive, and you're right next to it, and it just seemed like sexier and more, a different challenge. Although at ESPN Radio, I had I actually produced Dan Le Batard's show at the time, and Dick Schaap, who, rest in peace, which was just an amazing experience. And then his son, Jeremy. But yeah, I was convinced by an executive that I should try to craft a position. Because when you're a TV producer at ESPN, there's a traditional path. Like you start off as a temp production assistant, and then they decide whether they're keeping you. And there's a very specific ladder that you climb. And I already was kind of not on that ladder, and I wasn't going to start at the beginning. So I basically pitched a job called talent producer, where we took SportsCenter, NFL Live, these shows, and like, well, instead of talking to, T.O. or, DeAndre Hopkins or whoever it is about some incident, like bringing on beat writers to talk about it, like, let's talk to them. Let's try to advance the conversation. Let's try to make our own news. So I guess I convinced enough people. We started the department, it grew, and so that was that. And then I think I got to how the Football Girl started.
It sounds like you've had a lot of fun, but I can imagine it's not always been that easy. What would you say have been the highs and the lows?
I mean, the high is I get to work in sports. I mean, it's as kind of unstable of an industry as it is. It's super fun when you're in the throes of it. It's just, it's sports, and and when you hear the like really old disgruntled sports writers that are like, oh, like the food in the press box is not what it used to be, and you're like, you're covering sports, dude. Like this is, I always maintain that anyone entering this industry had to be a sports fan. I mean, maybe those people are the exceptions, but yeah, I mean, it's still, sports changes. It's not boring.
No, God, no, absolutely
Rules
not.
change, players change, personality, the story, there's always new stories to tell. So I love that. If I win, and I don't want to, rip on other industries, but, like my husband's an attorney, which is great. And he loves his job, but, as much as I love mine, to me, it seems really boring. And like, it's not, like the law doesn't change. Like the law was invented in whatever, like, his type of law, and it doesn't change. Everything changes in sports.
Yeah, absolutely.
The lows, it's not, it's not a super high paying industry. That's hard. It's obviously, being a woman, even today, has its downfall. For me, and I've talked to many women that are in the same boat, even women you would see on television wouldn't believe they would say this, but there's still that like proving grounds that for a lot of us feel like we have to have, walking into a locker room and talking to a player, and in your mind thinking, wow, they're not going to inherently respect me or inherently think that I know what I'm talking about. So somehow it's my job to make sure that they know what I'm talking about. Whereas maybe a man walks in and it's like, oh yeah, I can break down the, 3-4 defense, whatever it is. And that's not even a thought. That might be foolish. And I think that's probably unfair to most players, but because of experiences a lot of us have had in the past, I think that still can linger sometimes.
And what do you think it needs to take for that kind of, like, I guess, mentality to shift?
I think it's a lot of it is not real. I think there's not that many players that look at me, or if you walk in a locker room and think, wow, she doesn't know what she's talking about. I think there is more of an inherent respect now than there ever has been.
Yeah.
I think the guys are younger. They've come up in a different generation. Even in college, they've had, female trainers. In the NFL, a lot of them have female coaches. There's women in the booth. There's just more media discussing this sport in an analytical way. So I do think it's gotten better, and it's probably up to people like me to just like kind of drop that lingering thing. And
yeah, it's easy to think that way, but I think what's good is, I mean, I've certainly seen a shift from when I was like first a fan, which in fairness isn't that long ago. I started following the sport in like 2012, but I've seen that shift myself, where it was mostly just men that you'd see on the screen, whereas now you see more women than ever, which I think is amazing.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's great. And you just look at people like, Mina Kimes, Beth Mowens going in the booth. I mean, Andrea, at this point too, you have like your Andrea Kramers, your Hannah Storms, like women that have been around for like 3 decades. That, I mean, you talk about reporting, and you look maybe at Peter King as like gold standard. I mean, these women have spent more stories than like anyone else, like great storytelling, great connections. I mean, in this business, it's so all about connections and who you can call and who respects you. And I mean, I would put basically just like a boatload of women up there with anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And has there been anyone, be it at the beginning or throughout your career, that's helped mentor you or perhaps has inspired you?
My mom, I actually grew up with a single mom, and she was a big sports fan, and she kind of just like let me breathe and do that and listen to San Francisco. I was actually a bigger baseball fan probably when I was really young. let me listen to San Francisco Giants games on the radio and took me to games and just sort of helped like satiate that desire to just always have sports around instead of being like, oh, you need to take, I don't know, what Girl Scouts or whatever. From a career standpoint, the Dick Schaap was like when I worked in San Francisco KMBR. I mean, I definitely had hosts that I was close with. One in particular named Ralph Barbieri, who's a kind of a legend in San Francisco, and he saw in me very early, the skills and the drive. And he's actually one of the people that's like, I want you to be here, but like, you should go to New York. Like, you have too much energy for you're too type A for San Francisco. And honestly, now I'm back living here, and after being in New York, and I'm like, maybe he's probably right. I'm like, why am I walking faster than everyone else down the street? But no, in terms of, he talked to me and as sort of a intellectual equal and sort of pushed me to, hey, why don't you try and run a network someday? Just things that I hadn't even thought about for myself. And then when I did go to Connecticut, and Dick Schaap, who's like, one of the biggest legends, titans in the industry ever, and he was sort of an afterthought at ESPN Radio because it was all about like the morning show, and at the time Dan Patrick's radio show, which was understandable. And they're like, oh yeah, there's Dick Schaap, he has a Saturday morning show, I guess we'll just have you produce that. Suddenly, like, I'm in New York and I'm sitting at dinner tables with like Joe, like all these just like New York legendary athletes, Joe Namath and all these people, because he just had this way of connecting people. And he was just like such a classy, giving human being. And he really did teach me like the power of just, he would have dinners and it would be me and like his trainer at the gym and like, like I said, like Joe Namath, like, the delivery person. It would just be like the most random collection of people. And that was what he did. And he was so good at bringing people together. So I've just tried to just incorporate that skill into my own work and life in general.
Absolutely. And I guess having gone through the experiences you've got, the knowledge and insight you've built over this time, what advice would you give to, I don't know, your younger self, or even just to someone who's got a passion for American football that's looking to kind of start a career covering that?
Yeah, well, maybe wait till next year, first of all.
Yeah, that's a very fair point.
I think I did all the grunt work, but I don't think I realized when I was young, I didn't give my immediate superiors attitude, but I would go home and be like, oh, that sucked. I just sat there and logged tape, and I just wanted to do something more creative. But like, just accepting that that's part of it and not assuming that you're just going to jump from point A to B. It does happen to some people, but you can also take a slower journey and also get to the same place. Be open to opportunities. Especially in this landscape of multimedia, podcasting, writing, TV, everything, video. You could become like, just utilize everything out there. If you're a person and you have free time and you have passion for it, like, try to make a video series. Try to just try stuff out. Especially it's the internet, right? Like, you can put things up and if it sucks and people don't, move on or take it down or whatever. Right. And you don't know. And I know, like, with ESPNW in particular, someone read something that I wrote on The Football Girl, and he told me, he's like, I wanted you after I read this particular piece. And I didn't, this was right when we had started. And I'm like, I don't think anybody read anything on here yet. But you don't know who's going to listen.
Yeah.
And actually, in fact, when I was hired at Sports Illustrated, the person who recruited me, because I wasn't looking for a job, and he's like, I heard you on a podcast talking about your career and how you wanted to, have a bigger platform or whatever. So you don't know who's listening to what, and who's, so put yourself out there as much as you can, and just don't give up. It can be a tough industry, but I think there's more and more opportunities, and many, again, you can create yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And writing aside, you also have your The Football Girl podcast. Now, I love this show, and I've loved hearing from these women in like high-flying careers in the NFL. And I've also loved listening to the episodes where your husband's joined in, so your football date night episodes. And you know what? It's just such a fun listen, and I've learned a lot from it too. And obviously for you, you know, you've enjoyed hearing from all of your guests, but is there like one person or maybe one story that you could highlight that really stood out to you?
Yeah, you know who really, I mean, I love everyone who's been on the pod, of course, but I think Sam Ponder, she was presented to me by ESPN. I didn't know her at all, and I didn't have negative preconceived notions about her, but I was like, oh, she's like beautiful and she's the star, and like ESPN's just forcing her to do this because they know, you know, this. And she was just unbelievable, authentic, talking about, you know, health scares and having to get restraining order, you know, just and so authentic, and I don't even know how to, I was just so like, I can't even talk about it. See, this is how I was during the pod. I just kind of sat back with my mouth agape and just so, I mean, like I was kind of tearing up chatting with her because she was just so real. And I mean that if anyone ever listens to any episode of my podcast, and it was honestly, I think it was probably the most listened to we've ever had, because it was one of those that people listen to and they're like, oh, you have to listen to this because Sam is so great.
Wow.
She's just yeah. She was I don't know, again, I don't know what I expected. I just kind of expected this sort of like, you know, you talk to some people and it's like, oh, and not on my podcast, of course, everyone is great, but like you hear interviews and it's like, oh, well, I'm here and you're here. And even though she is here and I'm here, and oh yeah, we're doing a podcast. My one hand is high, one hand is low. But she made it feel like we were just friends having like a real like girlfriend conversation.
Yeah, do you know, I must say that's one thing I've learned kind of with like podcasting. So like I might be sat there thinking, oh my God, I'm so nervous to speak to this person. Like they're like exactly what you said. They're up here and I'm down here. And there was one person I spoke to, so it was OCU Manura, so former Super Bowl winner with the Giants, and he's over here in the UK now. And I remember kind of waiting for that call, thinking, oh my goodness, like, how's he going to be with me? Because I've had no idea what he was going to be like. And honestly, he was the nicest person, and like even before we got recording, he was kind of like asking me how I am, and you know, telling me I've been following me on social for a while, and he really likes what I was doing, and like just was not expecting that. And it instantly made me relax. And I think sometimes you have that conception with interviews, not always, but like certainly, because you don't know what to expect, do you? Like you don't know how it's going to be. And yeah, it always kind of blows me away. Like every single person I've spoken to has just been amazing.
Oh, that's so great. That's awesome to hear about OC.
He's a cool guy, very cool guy.
I'm going to listen to that episode.
Do. So yeah, back to football, I guess. Now, this year is obviously a really weird one. Coronavirus has basically stopped almost everything globally. And we saw the draft obviously become something that was basically completely virtual. And a lot of people thought that was going to be a disaster. Like, how did you find it?
I thought it was going to be a disaster too, and I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, it was cool.
I loved seeing all the coaches and GMs backgrounds and incorporating their families and obviously the draftees. I really loved the draftathon too, which I wish got better billing. It was kind of like this side thing on digital, but I would, I'd click on it like, oh, there's Russell Wilson, your guy, right? There's Tom Brady, like razzing Russell Wilson because his Wi-Fi is going out in his house. He has to do this from his car. And then there's like Brett Favre on one screen. I thought that was really cool. But I think that, to me, I can't believe I'm actually saying this. I loved Roger Goodell during the draft. Like it was a totally different side of him. He was a human being.
Absolutely,
like, you know, Friday night you saw, I mean, he's slouching in his chair from exhaustion and,
Yeah.
and wearing quasi-normal clothes, and you're like, oh, he's a real person like us, like actually being impacted by this. So I just love the authenticity of the whole thing. And I don't know, I'm sure they will go back to the glitzy, you know, high sponsorship, like kind of veneer thing in the future, but I hope they can incorporate some aspect.
Yeah, because it works really well. Like you say, it brought that human side to like everyone, and something you don't always kind of see. So, like, certainly for me, it kind of made me kind of, you know, realize everyone is normal. Like, Roger Goodell is a normal person. Like, it was really cool.
Yeah. Cliff Kingsbury's house was not normal.
Oh my goodness! Like, we don't have those houses in the UK. That was unreal.
I know, I was on a Zoom call last night for like a youth baseball thing, and one of the board members had that as his background.
I'm going to do that on my next call.
Good idea.
And I guess right now as well, we don't really know what's going to happen with the season either. Like, we know that London and Mexico was cancelled, and the NFL seems keen at the moment to still kick off in September. Now, whether that includes like fans or not, or whether it's like an empty stadium, I don't know. But I mean, I guess if it goes ahead, that, you know, to me, that puts a lot of people at risk, you know, players, staff. Like, what's your take? Do you think the season's going to start in September or not?
If I had to make a choice now, I would say no. And I want to also say that there's this whole notion that there's so many members of the media that don't want football to be played, which is completely preposterous. I mean, we love football. Like, people's livelihoods depend on it. Our industry is already shaky. So of course we want football. But like, I live in California, and, you know, our governor here, Gavin Newsom, you know, we're one of the most conservative states in how we're not normally politically, but in how we're handling the virus. I mean, where I live, the parks just reopened the last week. Like, you couldn't walk on any green space. You can't, you know, we're you know, other states in the US, like where my mother lives in Arizona, they've opened everything apparently but bars, which is like gyms and hair salons and all the things. But a lot of, you know, a state like New York and California, which have more power and more sports teams, quite frankly, you know, our governor, as I was saying, he said he can't envision even crowds of 100 people being together until we have a vaccine. So then if you take 2 NFL squads, that's more than 100 people, like, let alone fans. Yeah. So I know there's been talk of neutral sites, but there's also there needs to be, you know, inequality about the team. So, you know, there's a lot of complications. And then, you know, what happens when one player gets it?
Well, that's it. Yeah. That like stops everything.
Right. So there's you know, and obviously we all want our sports in the fall. Like, that's what defines the fall. Right. Yeah. So there's going to be, you know, it's going to be a very, very sensitive calculus between giving us what we want and what we're used to and what we feel like we can't live about, and then actually being okay putting lives at risk, essentially. Yeah. I don't see fans in the stands, though. I will say that. That seems scary.
That's it. But then at the same time, like, I watched like WrestleMania, and I just felt so weird not having an audience. Like, I couldn't, I mean, I don't watch wrestling anymore anyway, but like, I wanted to tune in just to see how it would be without an audience. And to me, it felt weird because the wrestlers are obviously playing up to an audience that wasn't there anyway. So it just felt weird. And obviously with like the NFL, it's slightly different, but still, I can't picture it without a crowd.
Yeah, I agree with you, Liz. I mean, do you think the NFL is not worth playing if there's no crowd there?
I don't know, because it's so hard, isn't it? Like, there's so much more to it. I mean, there shouldn't have to be a crowd because a sport is a sport. It shouldn't have to be a spectator situation, but like, we've had it with soccer over here. So there was like an event, like kind of, I guess last year, where there was quite a lot of racism. So they didn't allow any crowd. It was basically just an empty stadium. And then it just felt weird not hearing people. I think it's probably the main thing. It's not about seeing them. It's, I guess, hearing the atmosphere. So ultimately, no, there isn't a need for fans to be there, but it just would feel weird.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think we're kind of taking the athletes for granted also, who thrive off of And that's the whole point of having home games, right? Is
to of course.
I mean, you know that as a Seattle fan. But I don't know if you saw the report. Joe Buck was saying Fox was considering virtual fan noise.
Yeah, I've heard about this.
Sounds terrible. Oh my gosh.
Well, there's stadiums that can like pump in white noise of fans anyway, isn't there? So it must happen.
Yeah, it's I don't know what I'm not mentally prepared to see an NFL game without fans.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page there. I think that'd be very strange. But yeah, I just look forward to the day when normality comes back, or certainly a level of normality. And yeah, the games are back on our screen, so I look forward to that day very much.
Yes, I very much agree.
Well, listen, Melissa, it's been amazing to speak with you today. Thank you so much for sharing your story, and I look forward to speaking again soon. Yeah, thanks for having me. This was great. I really enjoyed hearing Melissa's story, and I love what she's done and has been doing with TheFootballGirl.com. If you haven't already checked it out, then make sure you do. For those of you on social, you can follow Melissa on Twitter at TheFootballGirl or on Instagram at TFG_NFL. Well, that's it for another episode of the Cleats Off podcast. As always, I'd love your comments and feedback, so feel free to reach out to me at NFL Girl UK across Twitter, Facebook or Instagram. And finally, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. I wouldn't want you to miss a single episode. Join me next time when I'll be speaking to Erica Tamposi, aka Ricky Hollywood, producer for Around the NFL. Until then, thanks for listening.